Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I am your host as always, Steve Hall, and I am here with Dr. Emilia Thompson, who I'm very excited to interview, and we're going to be talking about something that I think doesn't get talked about enough within the fitness industry in general, and I think Emilia is doing a fantastic job at it, which is why I have her on here. I think it's becoming better known, and we'll dig into it. But first of all, I want to introduce Emilia to you guys. So Emilia is a registered nutritionist with the Association for Nutrition. She's a lecturer in sports nutrition. She's a PhD in exercise physiology and has also competed in bikini and has done incredibly well. She competed for 3 years and was really successful. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Emilia, a little bit about yourself or anything I should have said.
No, you've done quite well there. That's quite flattering, thanks.
Well, it's all stuff you'd really do. So it's nice when someone, sometimes lists off your achievements in some ways. Also, I should say she's an online coach and helps a lot of people with some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So the thing and the topic of today is going to kind of be mindful eating and developing positive relationships with food. And across social media, Emilia does a fantastic job at kind of discussing this. I think it's a little bit of a niche that a lot of people don't necessarily discuss, but I think it's maybe a lot broader than many realize. So the first kind of question I wanted to go into was specifically, what is your experience with kind of mindful eating and what took you to go down that kind of route?
Yeah, so my background is quite similar to a lot of people who have competed before. I went into competing not really knowing what I was doing, and that's quite normal, and following really structured meal plan approaches. I'd kind of come from a background of quite disordered eating patterns myself. I'd been a binge eater, but I didn't quite know what binge eating was particularly. I'd been the kind of over-restriction person. I'd been very underweight. And then competing allowed me to get stronger and feel good about myself. And so I got into competing, and after I did my first show, my first full season, I really fell back into old habits of kind of binge eating type behavior and over restriction again, and binge exercise as well. And I kind of didn't really address it until I did a full other season. So I competed the first time with a coach who was great, but it was quite a kind of traditional method of prep, but that was great at the time. I competed a full season myself, self-prepped. And again, after competing at finals, I fell into that kind of binge eating cycle again. And there was nobody out there that ever spoke about it. No bikini athletes and no bodybuilders ever said to expect you're probably going to have a hard time after you compete. And so I was quite naive to it. And at the time I was lecturing in sports nutrition. So I had access to a lot of good people. I was in a nutrition department, and I just kind of started researching what I can do to help myself. And I kind of fell into mindful eating and the kind of the tools around mindful eating. And then I just kind of delved into the research and took it from there, and I used it on myself first. And then the more and more research I did, the more and more I found out how much it's used in binge eating type behavior and disordered eating, and kind of just escalated from there, I think.
No, I think you're completely right in that. It's only until recent years we kind of had the reverse dieting, which was first popularized by like Layne Norton and things. And it's only been, I think, maybe a couple of years that they've had kind of the recovery diet with the 3DMJ guys. So there wasn't really, these came around because of the people struggling so much after shows. And it makes complete sense when you think about it. Like, of course, we've just dieted ourselves down to kind of extreme levels of body fat for a long period of time. The body wants to get back to normal. Why do you think your kind of eating habits developed the way they did? Do you think it was because of the extreme protocols of kind of for bikini, or do you think it was kind of the restrictions that were put on to the diets that you had to follow initially, or what do you think it maybe was?
I think it's really important to say here, like, I think competing gets a really bad rap for producing these types of disordered eating habits. Generally speaking, it only happens to people most of the time if you've got something underlying. Whether or not that's been triggered yet or not, it might not have done. So I had those issues before I competed. It wasn't a result of competing per se, but it's the extreme restriction that comes with dieting, regardless of how flexible you are. The first time I wasn't very flexible and I struggled more so. And the more flexible I became, the easier I found it. But it's that kind of combination of the change in your body, which we all know it's hard to see your body going the opposite way to what you've kind of programmed your brain to think should be happening for the last 16 weeks. And the fact that I was just starving, and I had no regulation of my internal hunger cues, and that's where mindfulness comes into play quite a lot. You know yourself, you learn to just switch off that hunger. You just deal with it, and you say, "Oh, hunger's normal. I can ignore it." And when you come out of a show, the binging kind of occurs because you honor your hunger like you should, but then you feel guilt for honoring that hunger because you haven't allowed yourself to do that for however many months, and so the guilt pattern kicks in, and it just results in more binging. So it's a mixture of it all, really. It's not competing per se, but it is that extreme dieting for sure.
Yeah, I think you're completely right in that it's not like when you compete you're going to come out with an eating disorder, but I guess we all understand elements of competing produce disordered styles of eating just because you have to kind of weigh out things to the gram. You have to be that extreme, and then you want to transition away from that. In terms of that transition, what kind of steps did you take? I guess initially it was probably quite difficult. Did you have I guess you probably, like anyone, went into it and found things that were successful, things that weren't. Do you have like a process now?
Yeah, so I have quite a clear process now for anybody that is making that transition. For myself, I just looked into research at quite simple things to begin with. So really small things that everyone should be doing. So slowing down your eating, finding out how long you take to eat a meal. Most people eat a meal, especially on prep, within about 30 seconds, and then you've got nothing else. Things like slowing down your eating. I switched all my utensils from big spoons to teaspoons and forks to chopsticks, and things that forced me to slow down. And that's the first step, even now, that I will still use for clients, not encouraging them to use chopsticks, but just to slow down. Eating with distractions, that was a really easy thing for me to do first off, and it does work. We all eat with our phones, with the TV on, or with some sort of distraction. And again, that's the first thing that should come into play. Even now, that's the first thing that I'll have clients work on, is eating a meal without distractions. To be honest, nothing really didn't work for me. Everything that I implemented from the first bit of research that I did, and it's probably because I based what I did on a pre-established program. So the mindfulness-based eating awareness training program, it's a kind of specific program of 8 weeks, and it starts to implement things like what we've just spoken about and meditation, etc. So I use that as guidance for myself before then expanding on that for clients and things like that.
Do you find it at all difficult, or do any of your clients find it difficult moving from kind of, I guess, that precise accuracy of knowing they've hit certain like numbers if they are tracking macros, to then like not using their food scale and doing things more by eye and by feel? Is there anything, I guess, is that just an inherent struggle you have to go through, or is there anything you found to help with that?
It is an inherent struggle. Everyone goes through it, especially competitors. I work with a lot of girls who have a great coach until they compete, and then they come to me for that off season, and then they say, my coach is great, I want to prep with them, but I just need you for this period. And that's fine, that works. That works well for me. And they're the ones really that struggle most with it. Of course, they've got it ingrained in their head, and it is just a slow process. And there's certain tools that we implement and certain processes that we use to slowly move away from that. Not many of my clients move completely from tracking to then being fully intuitive. Only say 10% of my clients will fully move to that intuitive way of eating, because a lot of them don't want to do it. Yeah. And I think that although I promote intuitive eating for some people, I'm not anti-diet. And I think that's why like you said, I've got this kind of niche, because we have these really dichotomous groups at the moment in nutrition, as you know, of the anti-diet group and then the track everything that you eat group. And there aren't a lot of us that are in the middle. So yeah, but they do find it hard, and it is a hard process. We've been ingrained in our heads for how long that dieting is the thing that we need to do, and tracking is the thing that we need to do that, and it's very hard to get out of it.
I think it's nice that you kind of talked about how, not even all of your clients do it, and I think from the outside in, some of your people might think, oh, Emilia does a mindful eating, so all of her clients must do that, which obviously isn't the case. And it's very similar, like for myself, I'm often tracking, but I'll have clients who won't necessarily do that, or they do certain amounts of it. And I think it's really important to talk about the different methods, and there's different levels of it. So I don't know if you'd be happy to talk about kind of the strictest you go and then all the way to like mindful.
Yeah. So just to make a distinction, you've got mindfulness-based eating, which has been, mindful of your food and generally doesn't involve tracking. And then you've got the extreme end of intuitive eating, which incorporates mindful eating into that. But intuitive eating is very anti-diet. They are they very much are the type of people that think that dieting is the worst thing you can possibly do for your health. And they base that on all of the research that suggests that diets are not always successful long-term, which we know that research is there. So mindfulness kind of falls in the middle. So all of my clients will undertake some mindfulness eventually. Some of them are more reluctant than others. So the most extreme I have girls who compete. So there's no chance that they're doing that intuitively. And so they will track everything. I have some girls that end up on meal plans for a few weeks. That's kind of the most extreme last resort. Will transition you back out of a meal plan situation. So that is very extreme in my opinion. And then I have girls, like I say, who are very mindful, who don't track at all. And they are very much the intuitive eating types. And some of them have come from that extreme meal plan approach from other coaches. And it's very much a process of transitioning them out. And you can do that by starting to implement certain mindfulness-based techniques based on the original research that was done on that 8-week program that I suggested. That was originally done in binge eaters. So it was a very specific group. And the evidence doesn't say that it supports fat loss unless it's accompanied with nutritional support.
Right.
But that's fine, and I think that's where the anti-diet group fall down a little bit, in the sense that diets don't work, but the ones that do work are the ones that have the nutritional support. So people like yourself who provide that support, the diets do work and they can be sustained. And I think that's what they're lacking a little bit. But regardless, so I have clients on the full spectrum, and they tend to start with, all of my clients will have mindfulness-based habits within a month of them starting, all of them. And it might be something simple as no phones when you eat. And some of them already come to me that meditate, and they already do all of these things. And so we push it a little bit harder, and we have certain tasks that they have to do each week that helps them to tune into their internal hunger cues and internal fullness and self-compassion. It all kind of comes into one to allow them to eat more intuitively.
No, I like that. And I think it's a good way kind of viewing it, is that there's lots of different tools that you can use at different times that are appropriate. And very much like some of the ways of mindful eating, you might not necessarily do distinctly mindful eating, but you might use a lot of those tools whilst you're dieting, because eating slowly, focusing on your food is only going to help in that scenario. So you just kind of combine them to get to the result that you want. And something I'd love you to talk about, Emilia, is kind of your success with it, in that I think a lot of people maybe are scared to go down that route because they're like, I've always either gained weight or lost weight. I've never just stayed. And how am I going to do that if I'm not tracking and knowing I'm at maintenance? So kind of how long have you been doing it, and how's your kind of weight changed over that period of time? How's it been for you?
That's so normal. Just that kind of mindset is so kind of typical of anyone that's dieted, even someone that hasn't competed and hasn't actually tracked. But anyone that's dieting or has dieted, they don't know how to just maintain. And it is a result really of us being so focused on these external cues. So whether that's MyFitnessPal or what some horrific celebrities told us to do on Instagram, whatever it is, we've been so reliant on these external cues for so long that we just don't trust ourselves anymore. We trust our phone more than we trust our actual physiological body, responses. So it's quite normal. I haven't tracked anything for about a year and a half. I did British finals in 2017 in summer. And after that, I didn't track from the second day. So I don't reverse diet. I find that generally reverse dieting actually can increase binge frequency in a lot of people. So I personally don't reverse diet. Some of my clients do. And I didn't track from that point. So that's nearly 2 years actually. Last year I did an experiment where I dieted without tracking just to see what happened. And I got to about 2 kilos from stage weight, and then I went to California, and that was fine. So yeah, I'm quite successful with it, but I am very well aware that I've tracked for 4 or 5 years before that. My master's is nutrition. I know food inside out. I look at it every single day. Mm-hmm. I am very well aware that I'm in a sort of unique position in that sense. But like I say, I have clients now who don't track at all. Clients who come to me who are on meal plans who binge, who then don't binge at all anymore and don't track anymore. And although it's a scary process, a lot of the time it's just taking out the emphasis of scale weight. Once you remove the emphasis of fat loss is the only thing that's important. And that's what's great about intuitive eating, is that it's not a restriction thing, it's an addition thing. So it's more, you think about other health outcomes, you think about how you can add to your diet to make you more healthful. You can think about, it's like a process goal, mm-hmm. rather than kind of that end point goal of this is my goal weight, which is when we get those self-sabotage cycles. Intuitive eating is very much a process goal oriented thing. So it's all about habits.
Yeah.
But people don't want to let go of scale weight is everything. They don't want to let go of it, even if they say scale weight doesn't matter, but I still weigh myself every week. That's for the people that they tend to struggle with it, and it's very hard to let that go. Mm-hmm. Like I don't weigh myself. I probably weigh myself once every 3 months now. It's fruitless, really, if you're healthy.
I guess that is the worry of, if people feel maybe that the scale can show them whether or not they're being successful, like it's a tool of measuring it, but we know, mm-hmm. especially if they're doing it once a week or infrequently, or they don't have that understanding, they can get very immediately kind of like, oh, this doesn't work for me because my scale weight fluctuated by this amount, and they get into that bad cycle again.
Yeah, but then intuitive eating, there's so much research to support intuitive eating in terms of improved body satisfaction, improved overall health outcomes, reduced disordered eating patterns, mm-hmm.
Reduced
emotional eating. And why are they not markers of success? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, again, it's been ingrained in us for a long time. But why is scale weight a bigger marker of success if you're healthy? Why is scale weight more important than those factors? Yeah. And I think that people kind of, they don't want to look at themselves in that way, but they need to look at themselves in that way and say, why am I putting so much emphasis on what that scale says when I am healthy, happy? I don't binge eat like a lot of the bikini athletes do. You're probably healthier than the bikini athlete who weighs 10 kilograms less than you. Mm. But because of the environment that we're in, we're just so stuck on that number. Yeah. It's frustrating.
And I guess for competitive athletes, at least, the scale weight is always an indicator, because it's like, oh, this was my stage weight. I need to gain weight in my off season or whatever it might be in that regard. Do you ever have any ways of focusing on, obviously we have those other external factors of just being kind of satisfied and feeling good in ourselves. Do you focus maybe more on performance within the gym with some of your competitors? How do you kind of get them to focus on that? Yeah,
so performance in the gym is the first thing that we look at. But then I just, it comes through coaching, doesn't it, with your probing questions. And for me, a measure of its success is if a girl who's competed nonstop for the last 4 years and tracked everything for 4 years goes out for dinner with her boyfriend and it doesn't escalate into a binge, and then she doesn't do compensation cardio the next day, that's huge success. That's huge. That's much more successful than her gaining. And then her saying, actually, I've gained ½ kilo, but I know that it's nothing, and carrying on. That's bigger success to me and to them than anything else. And that's what will last with them for life. Scale weight doesn't last longer than a week or longer than a day. So they're not necessarily objective markers. And I know you love an objective marker. They're very much subjective, but that's the type of client that I tend to work with. Is lifestyle, big ticks in the lifestyle box are what's really important for me.
No, I think I can completely see that. And I've had that with competitors who have struggled to transition into that. And it's kind of like, that is in its own self like a win. Like that is progressive in life, like being able to do those things and live your life to the fullest, because at the end of the day, people get very obsessed with competing, but it isn't the be all and end all. There's a lot more to it, and you're not going to be competing for forever. Obviously, before you said a lot of your success you think came from, or at least was helped by, the habits and kind of previous nutritional tracking, understanding of all of that. Do you feel like that's maybe a prerequisite? Would you ideally have someone go through that before
Yeah, I try and have people understand that, and that's something that's quite different from the very evidence-based intuitive eating movement that is anti-diet. They don't tend to focus so much on that education side of things, but as a nutritionist, it's really important for me that people understand food. So yeah, generally speaking, I won't ever have a client that comes to me and immediately starts intuitive eating. Mm-hmm. I will always work with them to educate them on food first. So basic things, the macros, fiber, that type of thing. And then once they understand what a serving of protein is, then they can remove tracking of that. They don't have to weigh out a chicken breast. They know that's a serving of protein. So yeah, they do need to have some sort of understanding. And there are some people that are just not meant to kind of intuitively eat straight off, and people that have been very under restricted. So for example, competitive athletes who have no idea actually what they should be eating because they're completely skewed. And again, people who are very, very overweight tend to have that skewed vision of what they should be eating. So yeah, there are certain prerequisites to say you're not ready to intuitively eat at this point, definitely.
And something I've definitely noticed with you is that you're really careful with the language that you use. I think a lot of PTs, and probably most PTs in the past, have already been fallen for the good, bad food. Most people have probably fallen for this. And I know it's something you're really particular about, and that's part of your education. Why do you feel like this is maybe something people should have an understanding of? Good, and calling foods good and bad isn't necessarily the correct sort of terms for them. And then any other terms that you have a particular kind of dislike for, and why?
You know some of these. Well, really, intuitive eating is actually based on 10 core principles, and one of them actually is the removal of the good food, bad food labeling. So it's part of a fundamental principle of the concept of intuitive eating. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so focused on it. But it's because it's attached to guilt, and anything that suggests that one food is better than the other suggests that the one that is worse is in some way attached to some sort of guilt when you consume it. And we know that especially any sort of disordered eating, a lot of it is associated with guilt. And so choosing to use, even without realizing it, choosing to use foods like clean, which makes my blood boil, or, you know, I had a bad week with food. What do you mean by bad? It's just really trying to challenge people to think, what makes you think that food is bad in any way? And so, yeah, I am very, very particular about the words that I use. And sometimes clients, even now, they've been with me for a year, they slot in clean into an update, and I can't help but pull it up, because we don't want to have this good food, bad food situation. We need to get out of these kind of rules that society's given us, that certain things are better than others. So they're the main ones that I don't like. And again, as you know, I hate the terms when you refer to yourself as anything, you know, especially if you're an athlete, fluffy, soft, that type of thing. Again, that one kind of comes down to more self-compassion and self-kindness. There's loads of evidence to support that being compassionate towards yourself improves body satisfaction. It improves mindfulness around eating. It reduces disordered eating just by being compassionate towards yourself. And when you see, especially athletes who are of a healthy body weight, they may be 10 kilograms above stage weight, but they're still a healthy body weight. When they refer to themselves in that way as soft, fluffy, or whatever term they use, it not only shows that they have no compassion towards themselves, and they're more likely to have disordered eating, but it encourages everyone who follows them to then think that that's an okay way to look at themselves. And as women especially, we're brought up to think that we're not supposed to feel that way about ourselves. And so it is ingrained in us, but it's our responsibility as adults to say, I'm going to speak to myself in the way that I should be spoken to. And it does translate into eating behaviours, health, well-being, just little things like word choice.
Yeah.
So sometimes it comes across really, and you might have picked this up on my social media, hippy dippy, someone called me recently. Okay. But actually it is evidence-based. Yeah. You know, the self-compassion is an evidence-based practice to remove disordered eating and improve well-being. So that's why I get so passionate about word choice.
Yeah, I think the psychology of it is like massive. People don't really understand that. And even for myself, I know as competitors, we're very kind of, in a sense, body dysmorphic. We're very hypercritical of ourselves. But even for yourself, Emilia, I know for my own social media presence, sometimes I'll put out kind of a physique shot or something and I'll be like, I look less worse, and I'm trying to be, I don't know, you're trying to be somewhat humble, or try and be like, you're falling for that kind of calling yourself soft, maybe you're calling yourself fluffy. And in your eyes, you might be, but yeah, I think there's a bit of a responsibility on the person posting that. So for anyone who is already in great shape, like they know they're in great shape, what is the impact potentially on other people viewing it? Do you see that as well?
Yeah, so I kind of see this from both sides. I think that anyone with any sort of following at all has a certain responsibility. It's why I put up, a picture of me drinking tequila or eating a cinnamon bun or whatever it is, because I have a responsibility to show the type of person that follows me that is what I do, and genuinely that is what I do, and this is not bad. And I think anyone that has a following that trains well and is healthy, they do have a responsibility to know that they have young people following them who you'll have lots of people that look up to you and admire you and will hang on every word you say, and they will catch on to things that when you talk about yourself in a negative way, and they will follow up on that. On the flip side, and I've spoken to clients about this before, I get a lot of girls send me pictures and say, I wish this person showed herself when she was bigger. Wow. And I get this quite a lot. And then I say, well, why are you following that person? You have a responsibility also as an adult to say, it's up to them what they post. Mm-hmm. It's up to you what you follow. So I think, yes, we have a lot of responsibility about what we put up. And I would never in a million years put up a picture that said, I feel fat today, ever, because it's irresponsible. But people do have responsibility themselves to follow people that make them feel good about themselves. Mm-hmm. And there's too much blaming of other people and not enough personal responsibility on that one, I think.
I completely agree. I think there is a responsibility on the person looking at things to realize social media is the highlight reel, and people can put out anything they want. They can make up a whole life for themselves if they want to. They can be whoever mm-hmm. they want to be. And we see that. There's probably cases where that's been seen. And at the same time, I do completely agree with you that as someone with a following and you have influence, you should be responsible to share good information and not try and kind of perpetuate anything that you necessarily don't want to. It's a fine balance, and it's probably quite difficult for a lot of people. You do a great job at it. So I think if people are looking for that balance, kind of head over to Emilia's Instagram. She does a really good job. So in terms of, obviously, something you talked about was the standard for mindful eating, kind of that guideline of the 8-week kind of transition. Are there any other sources that you've read that have been particularly helpful for understanding this, or maybe you'd recommend to someone who's kind of new to mindful eating and want to kind of get a better handle of it?
It's very difficult because, especially with your listeners, they tend to be very fitness or science-based, and unfortunately, that kind of mindfulness intuitive movement just hasn't filtered in yet because it's so opposing to what we talk about all the time. So the original research, like I said, was the mindfulness-based eating awareness training program. So MBEAT for short, if anybody wants to look into that. And that's where I started looking at it. And then since then, the more intuitive work has just come from textbooks. I think you actually own one of the main textbooks, the one that was published originally in the 90s that developed intuitive eating.
These two women. Yes, on the front. Yeah, I do have this. I can't remember. It was going through my head the entire discussion we've had. I read it and I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it when I read it.
Yeah, it's a good book. It's one of the ones that I've never read from like start to end, but I use it for reference. And that talks about the 10 principles of intuitive eating. And it talks about things like body food congruent, which is really eating to nourish yourself. It talks about mindfulness meditation and how mindfulness improves eating behaviours. Talks about how to start listening to your hunger cues and your satiety cues. So it's a really good fundamental textbook. More recently, Laura Thomas, who is a registered nutritionist, she published a book called Just Eat It. And it's very anti-diet, but it's a great book in terms of it talks a lot about self-compassion. And again, it has lots of practical tips to use. So if somebody wants a more textbook or more book type thing to look at. And then those two books are probably really useful. Research-wise, there's a lot of research to support mindfulness, and disordered eating, but there aren't any other kind of very structured approaches other than the mindfulness-based eating training program.
Yeah, I was going to say with that textbook, I can remember reading it, and there were so many points where I was like, this sounds very similar to flexible dieting in many ways, which I guess is somewhat of a stepping stone potentially towards going towards a more mindful approach. Yeah,
and I read something actually yesterday, and they were talking about the differences between flexible dieting and intuitive eating. And I think what it comes down to is that flexible dieting still is very much based on external cues. And intuitive eating and mindfulness or mindful eating is very much based on internal cues. So I have clients, for example, who track, but we'll work on things like their internal hunger cues and their internal satiety cues. So they'll track, and then they'll say, I tracked that meal, but I didn't eat it because I was at a 7 on my fullness scale, and that's my limit. And they just throw it away, or they save it for later. And we talk about different things they can do, because a lot of the time we finish meals because we feel guilty. So there is a way to do both, but it does come down to removing your attachment to hitting MyFitnessPal bang on. But one of the things that's really useful for people to remember, and what helps them to reduce that kind of weighting on the numbers, is that the internal variability of our food is so huge. So as you know, food labels can vary by 10%. Then you've got the errors in MyFitnessPal. Then you've got, maybe you ran up and down the stairs a couple of times that day. It's so variable. And once people realize that there's inherent variability, regardless of what they do, it kind of helps to take the emphasis off those numbers. And because you've obviously got people like that, or yourself.
Yeah, well, I've definitely had experience with myself and with other people where people get highly attached to numbers, and trying to match like calorie balance day to day is just like, you just can't even do it. It's actually completely flawed. And for some people that causes even more stress, because they're like, oh my gosh, I can't even know what I'm eating, whether it's right. But really, like you said, it should be freeing, because you can't possibly know if you've entered 100 calorie deficit, because there's so many errors. Like there's just so much room there. Which, I think that is a great opening towards people being able to get into more of so I can't even control it that well. So maybe I can transition towards more of a kind of mindful approach. Mm-hmm. Have you ever used the mindful approach towards kind of off-season for any athletes, or kind of initial dieting phases? I know you did it yourself a little bit. Does that work well as well?
I've never had a client diet without tracking or intermittent fasting, or something like one of our more kind of traditional type methods. I have had quite a few clients who do off seasons and then go back to tracking on prep, and it's a great way to do it. And like I said, I kind of fallen into that role, I think, now, where I do pick up bikini girls from other coaches, and then they slide back to that coach, and that's great, like I said, because that's what people just want, lives in their off season. And I think it's fantastic that finally, that kind of grind harder mentality, 24/7, 12 months a year, is not necessarily dwindling. And I don't think it's bad for everyone to feel that way. If you want to feel that way, then great. But I think that the pressure to feel that way has gone and dissipated a little bit. And so, I do get clients who come to me and they say, this is what I was on pre-peak week. And this is what I want to get to. And it's mostly a case of, I just want to just live, and I want to be healthy. And so, a lot of my clients will do more intuitive eating. Sometimes it won't be full intuitive. Sometimes it will be, okay, I want you just to eat 4 protein meals a day and hit your calorie target. And that's pretty basic. And most of them will get to that point. And some of them will then go fully intuitive. And then they panic a little bit when they think they have to start dieting again, and they don't know what they eat. So they don't know where to sit. Yeah. And actually, I actually get some clients who fall into intuitive eating after competing with the aim to compete again, and then they realize they don't want to compete anymore, because they found this self-compassion, they found this health, they found this happy body size, and they realize they can live without binging. Because a lot of the time prep kind of masks any disordered eating, because you're so structured. Yes. And so people think it saves them. People think that prep and dieting is the thing that cures disordered eating. And when they stop dieting, they develop disordered eating, and it's not. It's masked it. And so they realise, they've removed themselves of all their binge eating or disordered eating patterns and guilt, and then they don't want to compete anymore. And so that happens sometimes too.
This is something I was potentially looking to touch on, was for yourself. I think it's interesting. Obviously, you competed for 3 years, and now not sure where you're going to head in future, whether you'll do it again. And I was going to ask if it had happened with many of your clients and kind of what the reasons were for it. I don't know if you have more to say on that for yourself. Like, what's your thoughts and feelings in that regard?
So, my struggles with, I've tried to diet recently without tracking, and I failed. After about 2 or 3 weeks, I just failed. I can't diet anymore. And I don't, what it comes down to a lot of the time is your values and your core values and what you value as a person. And when you compete, you value that challenge and you value that pride in winning a trophy. And at that time that I did, I really valued that. And it was a big part of my life. It was a big part of the relationship that I had at the time. And so it was easy to do it. And as I've transitioned out of that, and as I've got older, and my values have changed quite a lot. And external validation for me is way at the bottom. Competing is quite low at the bottom. Everything else is higher. So that's why I just can't diet. It's just not aligned with my values. And it's the same with clients generally. Their values tend to change because when we put more intuitive eating into things, it's about adding things. So it's about adding healthful habits. So things like I had on my Instagram today, fermented foods. Like your healthful habit of the week is going to be implementing fermented foods. And then when they go to prep again, I say, well, you're going to have to track that. And then you find yourself tracking things like fermented foods or things that make you feel good and you feel like you're treating your body well, and you then can't do that anymore. And so if you value health, your diet's really going to struggle. When you get to that extreme level, of course. So that's generally why it happens. I think people's values just shift. Yeah. And I am by no means anti-diet. And for people who value that, if I was 5 years younger, I might not be saying the same thing. It's just my personal values right now. I'm pro-dieting. I love competing and I love prepping people and all of those things, just for myself and certain clients who transition out of it. So my other coach who works with me now, she used to compete, and she is a classic example of that, where she came to me with binge eating problems. She'd been anorexic in the past, and she won't mind me saying this because it's public knowledge. She'd been anorexic in the past and she'd competed, and then her eating was just awful for her. And her focus, I coached her for 1.5 years thinking she was going to compete at some point, and now nothing at all. She's intuitive eating half of the week, and her values have just changed. Yeah. And she's young. She's 25, so it's not just an age thing. Yeah. So no, I don't think it'll be for me anymore. But you never know.
Yeah. No, I think it's nice because you have the skills and the knowledge to be able to go and compete again if you wanted to. But it's just not something that, like you said, it's just not your value right now. It's not what you hold in priority. And I think potentially younger people are not as experienced, and they see competing as something that's kind of flashy and cool and everyone's doing it, so you can get a bit drawn into it. But I think it's nice that there are, especially like there's knowledge now out there. There's people like you, Emilia, who are there to kind of, I guess, not save people. In some ways it is saving them after shows, so you can show them that once you're out of that, there is like more to life. There is something you can go to. It's not just a case of now you compete and that's all you can be. Yeah. Something I wanted to ask you actually, and I mean, I obviously know the value massively in having coaches. Do you think there's some of the girls or guys that you've helped do this with who they couldn't have done it without you? Have you had that kind of testimonial, that feedback? Because I imagine having a coach guide you through such a transition is just like it could be the difference between being able to do it and not.
Yeah. I'm really lucky. And it probably is because I enforce meditation on people, and I enforce the self-compassion, that people become very vocal in how they feel. And I encourage people to feel their feelings, because that's part of the reason we eat in a disordered way. So my clients love to tell me these things. And so it's great. But yeah, I have clients who have binged, for 5 years and they haven't binged for a year. And again, like Anna was a prime example of that. So yeah, I do get that type of feedback. I have a client now actually who, when we did British finals together in 2017, she came first and I came second. She's now my client, which is like, oh, she's younger than me, so I'm giving her age. But she's a really prime example of somebody who, she just said, I just want to eat like a normal person. And she says to me every single week, I've never been able to do X, Y, or Z until this point. And she's had a great coach, as far as I'm aware, for the last 4 years. So I know that it's to do with these methods and that support, but it takes a certain type of person to want to do that. You know, not everybody's ready to let go of that control. But as soon as people let go of that control, it will change their life. It's just a really scary thing to do. Yeah,
I can see that. And I think we've sold people on mindful eating quite well, but I do want to, just to see, actually, I actually don't know if there is. Has anyone failed to do it with you? Have you seen, not even with you, but you've seen people try it and it's just something they can't achieve?
Everyone can achieve slowing down their meals. Everyone can achieve some part of mindfulness-based eating. So even if it's a tiny small thing. So I have a really great client at the moment who was previously getting medical support for an eating disorder, and she's fantastic. She's gained some weight. She has mindful moments in the day. She eats her meals mindfully, but she hates meditation, and she's fantastic. She'll do whatever you say. She's really great and very smart girl. And she says, I just can't do it. I hate meditating. I don't understand it, and I've failed at it. So there are certain concepts that some people just don't get on board with, and that's completely fine. But she will do something else that's mindfulness based. So she goes for a walk in the day and has to have a mindful moment or whatever it is. Everyone can do something, and everyone will benefit from something. There, even just mindfulness based practice alone, if we take out any sort of eating behaviors, we know that it reduces stress. I actually saw a post from somebody today, an infographic today, that was speaking about meditation and improved hypertrophy because of the reduced overall stress. And improved sleep, they then may therefore hypothesize that it actually improves strength. So it's cool. And so mindfulness can improve everybody in some way. And as long, you just have to find that way that it improves for them, something for them, and then they're on board. And so yeah, everyone falls somewhere on the spectrum. I have some clients that send me check-ins with a huge big essay that says they really enjoyed a cup of tea and the way that it felt in their mouth, and I love it. And then I have other clients that say, yeah, I took 10 minutes to eat a meal and it was great. It filled me up a bit more, so that's fine. So yeah, we have a spectrum.
And to squash anyone kind of who might be thinking this, and I guess there will be people thinking this. Have you had anyone do mindful eating or go down that more intuitive road and just like get absolutely out of shape and really, really fat? No. And never. I've never had it. If I use myself as an example, I maintain body weight lower than my old off-season weight now by intuitive eating. So I'm used to gain about 10 kilos in off-season. Now I'm about 5 kilos above stage weight-ish. I don't know because I don't weigh myself, but ish. But clients are the same. Once my clients intuitively eat, they then tend to go off after a little bit because they don't need me anymore. And I've had clients get in contact with me later and say, I just want to let you know this is how it's going. And they look, I don't want to say better, their body composition's improved or it's maintained. But the emphasis has gone from that anyway. That's not something that they say, that's just something that I can see for myself. I've never had a client gain weight by putting into place mindful practices or by intuitively eating, ever. People that say intuitively eating is the reason that people are overweight these days, that's not intuitively eating. That's eating to environmental cues, such as boredom, such as TV, whatever it is. That's why we're overweight, not because we are listening to our hunger. I think what you've done a great job during this podcast is just explaining that there is structure and there's like steps you can take towards it. It's not just a case of, like a lot of people, I guess, when I introduce like if it fits your macros and they just run with that and drink whey protein and Pop-Tarts and that's all they have all day.
I did that.
I mean, people will be burnt if they go into mindful eating and just think it's if it fits your macros without macros, basically, and they just eat wild. Like you said, comes from the education, the background, all of that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes what does happen is that your weight does go up with that initial no tracking completely, but then it comes back down again. One of the underlying premises of intuitive eating is that you have permission to eat, and just telling people you have permission to eat, for some people is like music to the ears. They've never been told that it's okay to just eat, and so sometimes it does start to, their body weight might increase initially, but then when they realize, oh, well, I can eat that whenever I want, it comes back down again. So yeah, as long as people remember that they can eat when they want, when they need. Actually, people are most scared of that, but that's the best thing that they can realize that they can do.
And I guess at the end of the day, the body loves homeostasis, really. So you're doing the right practices. It should somewhat help you get there. Most people doing this, and everyone listening to this podcast, is going to be active, healthy people with a good background of it. So yeah, I think what you've spoken about here is going to help some people think a little bit more about what they're doing, whether or not it's something they want to try. And if they do want to try it, or if they want to get into contact with you, Emilia, kind of where are you both most present? Where should people reach out to you?
At the moment, most present on Instagram after a weekend of downtime. My Instagram is Emilia Thompson, PhD, and my website is emilia.fitness. So quite straightforward. And yeah, I talk about this all the time.
Amazing. I want to thank you very much for coming on, Emilia, and I want to thank everyone for listening. We will catch you soon.
Thank you.